evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our third episode of our Muse Afrika gender-based violence series. We at Muse Afrika are facilitating dynamic conversations from which we as the youth can learn. So this week's episode is titled Men, What's the Problem?, where we will be discussing various aspects of gender-based violence from the perspective of the men who we have on our panel today, in an effort to embrace men as partners in finding the solution to gender-based violence. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to our lovely facilitator, Lucky Chap.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can all see me and hear me. Happy Sunday. I hope that all of you are listening to Ndate Maposa's speech from last night. So this week should be an interesting one. I'll be facilitating today's conversation, and it really is a conversation. And I think before introducing my panelists this evening, I want to let everybody know that given the topic and given their very hectic and frank conversations and questions that I've been tasked to deliver, it's a safe space and it's a vulnerable space. So we're going to try our best to be open. We're going to try our best to be honest. But I'd like everybody to know that it's very, very vulnerable. And we're hoping that this is a safe space where we can talk openly and honestly. So can I please introduce my panelists? Looking at the Zoom call, depending on, I don't know how you guys can see. Ndate Vigela, can you please start us off, sir? Just a short intro, who you are, where you are, why you are here.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm very privileged, and thank you for all of you for attending. This is going to be a very interesting subject and debate. My name is Vigela Rankin. I am the founder of an organization called ValueEd. And ValueEd is a youth-based organization designed to develop self-mastery, personal excellence, and performance. We have a wide variety of programs that we run. I'm here because this is a subject that is near and dear to me, also because I was invited. That's another reason. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ndate Rankin. We'll look more and further to your insights. Next on my Zoom, Ms. Mbuli, talk to us.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Coach Lucky, for the beautiful intro, and Tabi, thank you as well. My name is Sitengo Simbuli. I'm a student at UCT, currently doing second year, studying politics and philosophy. I don't have the economics of the three, so it's just the two. I like to call myself a musician, a creatively inspired writer, storyteller of some sort. And I'm also here because I was invited, luckily enough, and because I would like to learn about this. You know, I think that there are some things that I've picked up in terms of what role we as men should play in the fight against gender-based violence and how we should become more aware of patriarchy and things of that nature. So there are things that I think I've picked up, but there's so much more that I know that I need to engage with, you know, encounter, think about, and that can only come about through, you know, being in spaces like this. So I'm very happy and lucky to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Mbuli. Ndate Paemo.
Good evening, Samanan Milan. I can't remember the evening one for Afrikaans, but you know that one. I'm Paemo Nyembe, currently the second year Eng student at the University of the Witwatersrand, hoping to do my postgrad in LLB. Also founder of Masidi, a women's safety app and startup. And I would like to thank the Muse company for inviting us here today just to discuss topics on how men can make a change. And going to level 2, we'll see that lots of men will be out partying, but more importantly, having to do their part, having to really put into practice what we've all been talking about during this lockdown period, and really have to change their ways, knowing how precious and how valuable women are in our country and how fragile we've made it for them to even live in the space.
Thanks, Ndate Paemo. And last but certainly not least, Ndate Makushul.
That's Tabo Mashologo. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tabo. I am a young man of 50 years old. I am a beneficiary of patriarchy. I am a parent of a son and a daughter, a husband, an uncle, and a son to a mother. I'm an admirer of the powerful women who are my sisters. But I started off deliberately by saying I'm a beneficiary of patriarchy. And I am one of those who grew up in an era where we benefited from institutionalized patriarchy. We have a job to do to unlearn that and to reteach, but it all starts with listening. So I am here to participate, to share, and to learn in equal measure.
Thanks for that, Ndade Tabo. You don't look 50, by the way. But we'll believe you. So, thanks for the introductions, everybody. And for those of you joining us on this chat, it's a multi-generational conversation with, dare I say it, Black men. And again, I repeat, in case we're not here earlier, is that this is a vulnerable conversation. It's a safe space, it's an open environment. So we're going to get into the conversation. I've got a list of questions that I'm going to ask my panelists. And I thank them once again for joining us. So the questions, they're quite heated, they're quite loaded. And I invite my panelists, like I said, to the open community. It is a safe space, but like I said, the questions are hard-hitting, they're very direct, and we would like, I guess, to walk away from this conversation having learned something. Perhaps we don't want to answer the questions in terms of what is right and what is wrong, but let's walk away with having perspective, with learning, with meaning. So, just for the outside environment, I hope, that we are conscious of that. So diving into the first question, and with no order in particular, why are we here today? That's my first question. I know Ndade Tabo touched on it in his introduction, so perhaps I'll leave him out for the moment for this one, because he did involve himself in his introduction. But for the rest of you, I'll start with you, and then get to Lako and Ndade Tabo. Why are we here today?
Come on, young fellows, you can start.
I'll have an attempt. I think, as Ndade Tabo touched on, we're here today as Black men to engage with what's going on in our world, to kind of engage our brains, kind of engage with the subject matter. And what the subject matter is in the world and in South Africa is that we as men, for generations, for almost eternity, have benefited systematically, have oppressed systematically, and have been able to lead a life that puts down women bodies and puts down other bodies, right? So we are here today. For me, I'm here, and I think we're all here to kind of engage with what is this patriarchy thing that is so spoken about, when Ndade Tabo says he benefits from patriarchy, what does he mean? And once we start engaging with those ideas, I think as men, once we start seeing what it is in our daily lives that we benefit from, and that beneficial, what we benefit from, how that directly implicates women, how that directly feeds into things like rape culture, into toxic masculinity. Once we start understanding those things and start engaging with them, then we can start working towards, dismantling them, because it should be our role, And I think one thing that's important for me when I say it should be our role, I think about the week in 2019, last year in September, after Uyinene was murdered. And I think about the protests that ensued in that week in Cape Town. I was in Cape Town during that week. And I just think about Black women being on the front lines of those protests, and how, you know, for a Black girl who studies at UCT, there's no, or anywhere, a Black girl in South Africa, what is the difference between her and Nene, you know, for them, for the Black woman? Why was it Nene and not them, right? So a Black woman has to, a young Black girl who should have her whole life in front of her, has to walk around with this realization that, you know, it could have been me easily, but still has to be on the front lines of that fight, you know, still has to stand there and basically beg men to stop killing them, you know? So I think it's about time that we started trying to be on the front lines of this thing, you know, started trying to engage with it critically and take the burden off the women who are, you know, constantly fighting for this.
I hear you, Ndate Mbuli, and I'll bring in Ndate Rankin, if I may, as Kis Ndate Nyembe. Ndate Rankin, it's interesting to hear Ustembiso talk about, you know, Inene and university students, because obviously that's his current environment at the moment. But I want to ask you, from your generation, and moving into the second question, closely tied to the first one, when we speak about gender-based violence and we say, where is the problem and what do we do about this problem? So can I ask you, Ndate Rankin, in hearing what Ndate Mbuli has just said from his own personal experience and perspective,
Yeah,
where is the problem?
thank you very much for that. My brother Tabo, I'm 2 years older than you, so I'm 52.
Up to Raki.
So thank you, and thank you very much for the question. And Muse, thank you very much for bringing us together to actually ask this question as to why are we here. We're here because we have broken communities, and our communities are continuing to break. We're here because we have broken values. Our value systems are beginning to, well, not beginning to, are continuing to degenerate. And as a consequence of that, we're beginning to see the effects of what happens when communities and individuals and their value systems begin to degenerate. We're here because the role of the man, from a universal point of view, is now beginning to be completely misunderstood, particularly from the man. We're here today because if we continue in this trajectory, we're going to have a pandemic that we may have difficulty in reversing. And we're here today, I hope, because the objective of what we're creating here is, one, an awareness and an awakening of what's going on, but two, to start putting in some solutions. Where is the problem? Well, the problem is squarely and fairly in the hands of men. There is no ambiguity in my view about that. We have a program in Value Ed that talks to men of value. And what do we do about it? And I don't want to take up too much time in terms of, articulating that even more, but what we do about it is begin to start facing the challenges that we have as particularly men, and trying to understand at the root cause what's going wrong. There is what I call the absence of fathering, which I think is critical. And when the absence of fathering, when we start breaking down the constructs of what fathering means, there are elements that you can start adding into there that a lot of the discipline that I learned in my life as a man came from my father. So when we start dissecting as to what do we do about it, we start having to start looking at the chemical reaction we have to almost reverse and start putting into place the things that are essential for young men. And when I say young, you guys are in varsity. I don't consider you young men anymore. I am talking about school-going age. I'm talking about the kind of things that I'm trying to do with my 6-year-old daughter in terms of how she needs to face the world, so that when I dearly depart this Earth, she has been embedded with something that can give her the survival instincts that keep her going on this planet. So that's my little synopsis of your two questions.
Okay, I hear you then, and thanks for that, Ntate Vigela. Mr. Nyembe, in understanding and in hearing Mr. Rankin, he talks from a parenthood, he talks from a place of my 6-year-old. You, on the other hand, because we need to realize and understand that us as Black men, as everybody has just reiterated, we're at different places in different sectors of society, at different ages, at different places. How do you, Ntate Nyembe, construct this manly role? Because we are speaking, and I'm glad that, I don't know if everybody heard, but Ntate Mbuli spoke to it earlier. He said, as a Black man. So I want to take what he said earlier, and I point the question to you, Ntate Nyembe. When we say Black men, and in hearing Ntate Vigela's point that he made, how do we deconstruct this Black man? What is a Black man in the South African society where we are right now? Because I think if we were to deconstruct that, I think it will help us in understanding perhaps the problems that both Ntate Thabo was speaking to a bit earlier together with Ntate Mbuli.
Thank you for that, Chair. So to what Barbara Rankin said and to what Mbuli said about the role of the Black man in all of this, we have to look back and say, when we think of GBV, when we think of the problem, many a time we have to admit to ourselves as South African people, as South African men, is we as Black men are the core problem. We are the majority in this country, in an African country, in that. We are the ones that hold culturalism, hold patriarchy in the hands of the people. And we're the ones that perpetuate the cycle, in a sense. Because me, at the moment, I'm in KZN, and I am with my very Zulu family, very, very proud Zulu, very proud culturally, and all these things. And many South African men share this proudness in their culture and where they come from and their understanding of their ways of life. The problem is with this is that we hold this value towards our culture and the way we've always lived life and the sense of manliness, as you said. We hold this skewed version of manliness. As I would assume our two older speakers would know, having children, is that when they were growing up, the objective to be a man was very different to how they would see a man nowadays, even how they see themselves, how I see them.
Yeah.
Because we grew up in this understanding that to be a man, you have to have a sense of power, control over women, the sense of proudness that doesn't allow a woman to stand over you or be above you in a sense, and always having to push women below and under. And in that sense, our deepest communication and our majority of our communication occurs with Black women. And I feel as if in answering our manliness towards Black women and so forth and so on, we have to change the way we perpetuate our own cultures and look back to our original ways of patriarchy, because we have to break those down and say that as much as these manliness or the way Lobola takes place, the way a woman in an African home, no matter her position, she can be a doctor, she can be a top banker and so forth. When she comes into an African home, which is truly African, she'll be expected to be in the kitchen and cook. And without that value of knowing how to cook or being part of the aunties and the gokos who are cooking and cleaning and doing the things that men don't do, they won't have value. But we value a man by his position in society and all these things and so forth. And I feel as if we can say we're making a progression, but we've got to challenge ourselves and actually call ourselves on the hard parts, because it's difficult. Like, it's very difficult to have to sometimes look at your own parents, look at your own family members and say, as much as you're saying something and you're believing in something, I have to absolutely tell you that it's wrong, because I, raising myself and speaking to my friends and speaking to my little cousins that live in Johannesburg, a space where we have a diversity of people and a progressive society as a whole, in many cases, especially in the affluent community that many of us live in, it's very difficult for us to actually make a difference if we're speaking to the converted. Like all of us here have a similar perspective, might have maybe a few variances, but a very similar perspective in terms of how we actually want to see a man play that role. But many a time we have, sorry, excuse me. We have
So
ourselves.
whilst somebody's buzzing you for Sunday night things, I want to ask Mtate Thabo on that point. In your interaction, Mtate Thabo, you spoke about how you are a multi-generational black man. You spoke about being a father. You spoke about being an uncle. You spoke about, you know, being a brother. So I want to ask you, as a man in our society, how was your relationship with women affected how you see and how you view women? And to extend on my question, I'm asking this in the context of your relationship, obviously, is different when you are an uncle, when you're a father, when you're a husband, when you're a sister, when you're a son. So going back to your introduction where you introduced yourself and you're talking about your roles as a man, I want to ask you, how has that influenced your view on women in knowing that you play a multi-dimensional role when it becomes to being a black man?
If I can just also start by saying, you know, I grew up in my generation. I estimate there are about 20 of us, cousins, siblings, etc. And out of that lot, about 7 of us are guys, and the rest are women. And these women are phenomenal women, right? You know, the only distinguishing feature between me and these women in terms of ability would be that I have a Y chromosome and that perhaps I'm a bit more muscular and physically superior. And I use that word advisedly. But there is absolutely no difference. This issue of attaching a value that exists beyond a real tangible value, this issue of attaching a further meaning by virtue of birthright, by virtue of what you're born with as reproductive organs, is as crazy to me as the narrative of race, that the color of your skin would somehow endow you with superior qualities. So for me, the discourse is quite interesting at the moment, because what we are asking white people to do in examining their privilege and acknowledging their privilege, in calling each other out on their privilege, is exactly the work that we need to be doing as men.
Exactly.
We cannot be talking about Black Lives Matter. We cannot be talking about equality. We cannot be talking about all of these things and then perpetuating the very same things against people we purport to love and respect. We cannot be talking about Black Lives Matter and then going out and killing our African brothers in the name of xenophobia. But let me not digress, because we're here about a particular issue. And the particular issue is, a lot of the guys have spoken about it, is the absurdity of this privilege that comes purely by chance, by virtue of what your reproductive organs are. This privilege, and tracing it back, you know, whether we talk about it from a cultural perspective, whether we talk about it from a traditional perspective, whether we talk about it from a religious perspective, is so deeply entrenched. So let me try and answer your question a little bit more directly. You've asked me what my relationship with the women in my life are. My mother was humiliated. She was an economist. She was going to a meeting of bankers in Libya, and she was upgraded to business class. Okay. And her boss, who was a man, saw her in the cabin and said, "You're a woman, you shouldn't be here." And humiliated a senior qualified homemaker. My mother was the first to be educated in her family, in her nuclear family. She took it to the level of masters. She was not allowed to sign a mortgage bond to buy the house. My father, who was an alcoholic and unemployed, had to sign on her behalf. And yet she had all the means to sign for herself. Ironically, that same father beat me 3 times that I can remember in my life. The first time is because I insulted the lady who cleaned at our house. I was about 11 and I swore a filthy swear word and he clapped me until I was dizzy. The second time, I hit my sister and he slapped me until I was dizzy. And then the third time, I can't remember. But the point is, Ntate Vikela spoke about parenting. So I learned early on that aggression against women is a no-no in my family. And that's been a valuable lesson in my life. But what has been an even greater lesson in my life has been watching my sisters in action. Those 13 women who I'm proud to call my sisters are everything in terms of their accomplishments. They work hard, they're smart. I'm sometimes intimidated by them intellectually. And I can't understand. So I have recently been endowed with a piece of land. And the only reason I was endowed with that piece of land is because I'm a guy, right? And these phenomenal sisters of mine are excluded from this kind of endowment. So we're at a point in time where I'm raising a daughter and I'm raising a son. And all of these things that I talk about as being a beneficiary of patriarchy, when juxtaposed against a clear indication of the value that the women in my life bring to this world and to their own lives, is what brings us to this conversation. Respect. Respect is what we have to have. That's the founding thing that we have to do. Is first and foremost, if we're going to unravel this thing, we have to operate from a perspective of respect that sees past our agenda.